Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ, and of course, all of you that are able to take part in these live streams Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, of course, are our co hosts. And today we're going to talk about game design uh, and try to, as inspired by other game designers out in the blogosphere, to challenge the notion of some of our uh, staples in the tabletop role playing design sphere. As a matter of fact, I think I'm even going to uh, get rid of this so you guys can see a little bit in the background and such. Of course, I always like to surround myself with hey, Drew. I like to surround myself with bits of inspiration, and I'm a. If it wasn't for a tabletop role playing game, I'd be talking about comic books or movies, so that kind of thing. So thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. Very strange that sometimes it tells me there are people here and not here, and it never matches the number of people who are actually here. Because Drew, you were listed as zero, which not exactly sure what that means, but okay, I appreciate it. So part of this is just going to be a game designer's challenge notion, and I love challenging our norms. And then, hey, Kylie, is it over? We've you just got here. It just started. Really appreciate that. So, so first we're going to start out by challenging some notions and um, cutting the fat, killing our darlings. Sometimes we world creators, game designers. What are some other really cool names? I don't know. Whatever. Thank you, Kylie. We get attached to things, and I'm here to tell you that that can be a dangerous notion. That can be very dangerous when it comes to progressing our mindset in the creative sphere. Um, I think sometimes as creators we get so attached to something, and this isn't just game design. This can be literary or dance or anything artistic, and we're afraid that if we don't use it, we'll lose it. That if that somehow that creative spark doesn't exist past the point at which we've come up with a design or an idea about something. And I'm here to tell you that you can put it on a shelf and go back to it if you want to. It's okay to take your own thing and rip it to shreds and then start all over again. That's not what I'm doing exactly, but we're going to take a look at some staples. One of those was spawned by a simple conversation that another game designer was having with uh, a compatriot, and their discussion was about like, do we really need die rolls for success and failure? Do we really need hit points? Do we need to roll for damage and that kind of thing? And it challenged me a little bit, just simply because I love taking things back to its origins. Sometimes we as human beings can complicate our own lives, and I remember having a many conversations with my mom when I was younger about like being upset and emotionally distraught about a particular decision to make in life or behavior other people are expressing towards me, and I don't like their attitudes. And you know, when you're young, preteen, teenager, and young adult, um, 20s, heck, even my 30s, you know, sometimes we get distraught about things. And one of the mantras that my mom used to tell me was just like the 1-5-10 rule. And she would ask me, well, in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, is this particular moment going to matter in your future? Um, are, do you think you're going to remember this particular instance in the future? And I'd like, well, those people, I doubt I'll even be friends with them, let alone. And she's like, well, behave now like you would in 1, 5, 10 years from now, and you're done. If those people don't matter in your life, if you know for a fact in your mind now that they're not even your friends today, let alone in 5 years, you won't even know them, and you're going to move on with your life. Then today, act as if you would 1, 5, 10 years from now. And I've taken that to heart very much so. Where I barely have reactions to people when other people are like pulling their hair out. And using this and bringing it back to tabletop role playing games, sometimes we get attached to things, and it's like, why would the game remove or add or just or tweak something? And I just shrug my shoulders, like, yeah, but does it really matter? Does it really matter? Yeah. Deadman says, are dice rolls necessary? Depends on who you ask. Mark Reinhagen, creator of the World of Darkness games, says no. Gary Gygax, 10 rolls to stand up after sitting down. I love the way you put that. 10 rolls after sitting down. Um, so to me, the randomizer, I'll tell you where I'm going with my thoughts. So uh, the question of, do we need dice rolls? Like, what are we randomizing? What story are we trying to tell? Are we trying to tell pass fail? Are we whose hands are we putting the randomization in? Yes, we're going to pick on Fantasy D20. It's unfortunate because I dislike. We need compare and contrast, but I dislike beating up on an easy target. But all of us have been introduced into tabletop role playing games in some manner, and the vast majority of us, though not everyone, has been introduced through Fantasy D20, Dungeons and Dragons, or their derivations, and then we get to a point where we go, this mechanism in the game is not quite reflecting what I'm looking for. So, long story short, the name of the system that I'm working on is called Art and Science, and the art is the narrative, uh, um, fruitful void. Thank you, Drew, for bringing me to that descriptor. It is the space where we get to have a discussion about failing forward, partial success, the yes, no, if, and or buts, the well, a thing happens and we are going to twist the story to make it more interesting when our player characters stumble forward into great and wild and imagination. Sorry, I'm still laughing at Dead Man's comment about Gary Gygax. Oh shit, yeah. Lots of game designers have really, if they really wanted to, and this is despite making money and having uh, running a company on their own with their name at the top of it, many game designers would love to do so many different types of game design that would blow our minds. Like, there's the rock paper scissors idea. There's the flipping a coin. I don't know if you guys ever heard of a game called Go or Othello, where you have these chips that are like black on one side, white on the other, and just flipping a coin. I mean, there's so many, and some of those ideas have been incorporated in the games. So Drew says, my first game had been Star Wars D6. Ooh, there's a classic that I love. I love Star Wars D6. Oh, WEG West End Games, I believe, produced it or produced a first version of it. I believe now it exists simply as Open D6. But he says, anyway, Drew says, I played games for years before I played D&D for the first time. Yeah, again, not all of us were introduced to gaming using fantasy as our first, like, toe dipped into the waters. It's strange because sometimes you'll find that people who have been introduced to tabletop role playing games and fantasy wasn't, or fantasy D20 wasn't their first, you'll find that those individuals tend to be more polygamist than Dungeons and Dragons people, just simply because of access. That if you've been introduced to a smaller game, then it's not odd for you to see other games that aren't don't have as much market share. So I can imagine, Drew, like Fate and Star Wars and Champions, and we could name 30 role playing games that you know of, and I bet none of them. I know you have a preference for these games, but I don't believe you like have an intrinsic gravity towards one type of game or game mechanic over another simply because you played it first. Whereas a lot of times you'll see in like D20 when people are like, "Oh, here's percentile dice." Um, I used to call them percentile, just to be silly, but because there is a term called mercantile, and it's like, is it a hard C or is it soft C? Anyway, we were dumb, young and dumb. I'm not going to say the rest of that term, but you get the point. So yeah, Deadman says West End Games was nearly infamous for making dice-heavy games that rarely required dice rolls. Yes, yeah, and you know what? Part of that too is through a game design lens. Um, is do you give people what they need, or do you give people what they want? And sometimes the choice between the two can be a difficult one if you're both trying to market your game to as many people as possible and you're also trying to create a great experience. Talking about science fiction, Eclipse Phase was a game created and designed originally in its second edition and all its iterations thereof that doesn't have starship combat rules, and yet in the community, we beg for rules for things that the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So, starship combat rules, hacking rules, um, uh, going to fantasy more like sailing ship rules. There are rules for mass combat. There are sometimes there's rules for crafting. There are rules for um, downtime, and some games, the effort it takes to create those rules and the implementation of those rules in games sometimes don't equalize the effort put into it to put it into the game in the first place. I've already mentioned before about like my disdain for crafting rules uh, in the way that they are exhibited in many games, because and I dare say, I'm going to say it again. Uh, Crafting rules in fantasy and even in science fiction sometimes to me comes across as a little masturbatory, meaning like it is an enjoyment thing that happens on a very personal level, and very few benefit from your uh, delving into it versus the people you play with, your game master, your other players. The juice um, crafting isn't worth the squeeze implementing it into a game with other people who want to be involved in it is my point. If for me a great crafting system, much like a starship piloting system, incorporates everyone into the action, into the drama, into the development of a thing. Which brings me to uh, circling back here, hard segue back to die rolls. So many times we have games, and especially when the dice hit the table, we have something almost ubiquitously known as initiative. It's like we're doing the talky talk, we're doing the exploration, but we'd like to have some kind of action or some kind of conflict, and we need die rolls to, a randomizer to show, okay, my character has an 85% chance of success despite being very skilled at something. What happens when I fail? And oftentimes initiative happens when we have combat, and not every role-playing game, and a lot more games than we think don't have physical combat in them, but many games do have a conflict resolution system. And it made me think, like, why do we separate the initiative versus the roll for everything else in the game. Many games are like roll one separate die for who goes first, or they have an initiative system that decides to choose like we go around the table, or we start with the fastest person, or we start with the most perceptive person, and or we have a pecking order. I've played initiative with popcorn, called popcorn initiative, all kinds of initiatives. One of my favorite, which is a little bit complicated for people to get used to, but I really liked it, from a game known as Feng Shui, and it had countdown initiative. So it was like you would roll dice and you'd have a like 2-digit number, and every time you took an action, depending on your action, you would subtract. Well, each action you would subtract 3 from the number you rolled. So if you rolled like a 22, you you would count down. So we would start with who has the highest number, and then once you went and took one action, you would subtract 3 from it, and then we would go to the next number down the line. All right, 22, you rolled 22. Okay, you get to go first. And then I would sit back and subtract 3 from it. Then we'd say, okay, who's on 21, 20, 19, 18, 18, I go next. Okay, then what are you going to do? And then if you wanted to act faster, you could act on 1 or 2 instead of 3, but you would get that negative to any of your die rolls. So, oh, the bad guy's going to run over and slam the button on the starship door and slam the doors shut, locking us in. Well, if I was on 18 and my next action goes on 15, I'll be too late. So I go on 18. I want to go on 17 and stop him. Okay, great. Well, that means you got a -2 to your action. All right, I'll take that. I'll use one of my bennies, or moxie points or hero points or whatever the case might be, luck or whatever, to add to my die roll to, I don't know, throw a knife into the palm of the hand of the person that's about to hit the button or whatever. So we've done a little types of initiative rolls. So in fantasy D20, you often see the 20-sided die rolled for initiative, and then we add modifiers to it, and then we go about the rest of the game. And I thought, well, why can't we just have one roll for one roll, and then from that die roll or die rolls, you disseminate your actions during that encounter. So one part of initiative, not only do we need, we practically, outside of the game, we can't all go simultaneously. Otherwise, we would all be talking over each other. Now, within the game, you can have simultaneous initiative. I've played in games where we used a simultaneous initiative system. As a matter of fact, for Fantasy D20, I know I'm segueing. We used to do a D6 simultaneous initiative. So you would roll a D6, and that would tell you which second you went on. So if you rolled a D6, you rolled a 2, you would go on the second of a 6-second round or turn or whatever it is, or round. And everyone who went, all actions that happened on the first second would go and be resolved. And then everything that happened on the second would be resolved simultaneously, and third second would be resolved simultaneously, etc. So if your character went on second number 3 and struck an orc and killed it, that orc isn't dead yet until it gets to the 4th second. So everything that happens on 3, that orc can strike you back, or fire an arrow, or try to stab you in the throat, or push over the cart, or whatever the case might be. So all things that happened on second 3 would happen and resolve, and then second 4. So when it got to second 4, now the orc is killed, and everyone that acts on second number 4. Anyway, I know it sounds complicated, and I'm going through all these different things, and I hope you guys can steal some of these ideas. But my contention was, we use sometimes die rolls or randomizers to find out who goes first. Then we use a randomizer to say, what is your success and failure in acting, especially in combat? And then we use another randomizer for damage potential. And it made me think, like, well, wait a minute. Like, are we complicating our lives? How about we just roll the dice once? And I don't mean once for the whole game. I mean, roll them once, and through that die roll, we decide When do you go? How soon or late in the action dynamic do we go? Do we have any simultaneous actions happening? How successful or what kind of partial, full, or complete success and or failure do we have? And what is the outcome of that? And have all of that happen with one die roll? And so I'm deciding to keep it simple, stupid. KISS system, right? Keep it simple, duh, stupid for me, and go, well, why don't we just have an open die roll? And then everyone gets to see what the die rolls are for themselves, players, mind you, player facing. And then from that, the players can um, strategically choose in what manner their die roll has an effect on the narrative. And at first, I challenged myself to go, this can't work, because if a player rolls the dice and this tends to fall far more on the negative side, that if players roll dice up front in the game, they haven't even acted yet, and everyone rolls the dice, and a player rolls dice that are weak, it shows failure. It shows that, wow, this is the worst die roll I've ever had. Then player will not want to take actions that are going to lead to their subsequent failure. And then I thought about it and I said, well, this is kind of, maybe I'm thinking a little bit too hard on this, because this is kind of a bullshit idea. Nobody likes to fail. So if you know the failure is going to be there, maybe the players can take actions or a direction for their player character and for the story and things like that, just to mitigate the negativity, even though they know this is what's going to happen. They already know what the outcome is going to be. How do we just shape the story so that the outcome becomes what it is? So let me be even more specific. So the art and science of art and science system that I'm creating, the art is the narrative, the science is the die rolls, the science is the mechanics. Is it a 4 or is it a 10? Is it a 2 or is it a 12? Hey, Death Angel, and everyone else. I feel like using a 2d12, and I listen. I'm still emotionally attached to using d12s. I understand some of you out there are going, you need to let it go. Say goodbye, kiss the dice on the cheek, and let them walk out the door. But I'm still stuck. But here's my thing: using a light die and dark die, two different colored dice, black and white. Just like in the thumbnail, I use the smaller and sometimes bigger d12s. So you roll 2d12, and every player character, the star of the show, the stars themselves. It is science fiction, so them being stars makes sense. Less cinematic and movie, more science fiction as a star. But nonetheless, if all the players roll 2d12, a light one and a dark die, the light die being more beneficial. Call me death, yeah. You're so silly. Then the players know when they're going to act, how they're going to act, and where they're going. Now, at first, I wanted to call this system roll high, not over, and I still like this idea of rolling high but not over, but I'm going to put that on the back burner for something else. I think this is just going to be a very instinctual, very common, and easy to grasp roll high system. High numbers go big. High number big, much better than low number. So players roll 2d12, and they get to take two actions, and their action happens on the result of the die roll. So if they roll a 4 and a 6, they get to act on 6, which is the earliest number, and counting down, then their next action happens on 4. So a player could take a move action or an attack action or some other action. It's an action. Do they want to attack twice on 6 and 4? Yes. Do they want to move on 6 and then move again on 4? Yes. Do they want to move on 6 to a a location of optimal attack, yes, and then attack on 4, yes. Um, oh, no, no, no. This is my own. This is an open discussion about game design and a little bit of reflection on ourselves. Death Angels mentions, sorry for my ignorance. Don't be sorry about that. But is this light and dark from one of the Star Wars systems? I guess SW, maybe. I've never had the opportunity to play those. You are not incorrect. And if I'm not mistaken, in the Fantasy Flight Star Wars system, there is a light and dark. There's a die that represents the light and dark side, and it is represented by having fewer. There are more opportunities to roll dark side than light side, but you get more from the light side than the dark side. And it's supposed to represent that the dark side is easier. So there's more opportunity. I don't know what the, I could look it up, but I'm not going to. You guys figure it out. So let's say it's a D12 since I'm talking about D12s. So equal sides would be 6 and 6. But from what I understand, instead, there are more dark opportunities, which might be like 4 and 8. But if the dark side gives you like 1 pip or 1 Benny or 1 dark side token or whatever the case, however it's measured in the game. And then there might be 4 opportunities for light. If you roll the die, your chances are if you keep rolling it, you're going to get more dark than light. But when the light does come up, you get 2, 3, or 4 chits to use because the light side is harder, dark side's easier, but the light side's more powerful. That's how that game uses it. I'm so you're not incorrect, but how I'm doing it is I'm not doing that. This is just rolling 2d12, a light die and a dark die, and the basic system as I'm rejiggering it is just going to be you're going to roll your own dice, and you want your light die to be above your dark die, and you're going to attach all of your modifiers to the light die, and that means that there won't be any static numbers to roll above. Your number to roll above is going to be with the dice that you already roll. So instead of like the game master having to set a difficulty and then you rolling over that difficulty, I'm going to ignore all of not ignore it. We're going to bypass that. So when you roll 2 dice and one needs to be above the other one, it's eventually a wash. It's a 50-50 chance. So you want your light die to be above your dark die. The light die being very good, the dark die being more complication. Darkness doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means more complicated. So yeah. It says, okay, I know that it has dice with symbols instead of numbers or pips, but like I said, nobody has ever shown the system to me. So it's all inference. Let's see if we can find some. Let's see. Pics of Star Wars Fantasy Flight dice. Let's see if we can find some images here, and images that we can. Yeah. Here we go. All right. Because I love game design, and let's see if we can find. Restream has a new system here. If you guys are watching and not listening, let me know if you can actually see the dice and the symbols on them. Drew says it's 4 sides are D12, 7 sides are dark, 5 are light. Thank you very much. Wow, I was actually closer than I thought I was. I've never played the system, but I took a look at it. So I never got a chance to actually sit down, roll the dice, see what they looked like, that kind of thing. I wonder if I can make this. Let me make it bigger. Yeah, it's not that much different. Yeah, you can see them. Okay. Stop. Yeah. Stochastics here as well. Thank you very much. So these are the dice that are used in the Fantasy Flight Star Wars game. And yes, each of the symbols means something different. I know there are people out there who are pissed off at game systems that make you have to buy proprietary dice because everyone's like, well, it's a cash grab or something. You can roll regular dice. You can actually print out the numerical chances with like a small card or something, or just put it on your phone, and you can just roll regular dice. I mean, these are regular classic six, I'm going to call them. D4, D6, 10, 12, 20, and then just go to your little chart and whatever number you roll. So there is a way to do it. I mean, someone may say, well, do I really feel like printing out a chart or writing that chart down with the little symbols on it? I get it. I get. But listen, we, we as gamers, we also don't have a lot of money. So maybe it behooves you to take a sheet of paper or just click something online and go find the chart thing and you know capture the image, put it on your phone, and then just be done with it that way. So while I don't think it's a cash grab, I think it's a business move. Yeah. Yeah, Desiree says, personally, I'm not opposed to special dice. I mean, look at DCC. Yeah, D30. Yeah, D16, D7s. Yeah, I know. They have the crazy the crazy two-step dice. So instead of using a +2 -2 modifier, basically you grab another die that goes up by 1 or 2. So we know what step dice are, right? Like go from D4 to D6 and you step up or down the numerical value, and it usually goes by 2. But even in DCC, it can go by 1. Drew says, I like custom dice. I just find the Genesis supposedly narrative dice horrible design. I think there's too many dice to roll. I would prefer no more than 2 dice. But when you're grabbing, it's not bucket of dice, but it can get a little bit like, okay, now I'm rolling 7 dice and then trying to, and then some knock out the other dice. So to me, I'm almost like, just give me 2 to 4 and make it quick. So my contention is that we can use, if the engine is appropriately structured in a role-playing game, that we could use the dice. And what I plan on trying to do is use the dice to roll for when you take your actions, how effective your action is, and what are for your success and failure, and then the outcome of that action. Usually damage, but sometimes it can be successes and failures for that action. So for example, in fantasy D20, you may roll a D20 for your initiative. So you roll one die and add a modifier to it, usually Dex. Deadman says a full set of Fantasy Flight Game Star Wars dice, more than 15 dice is $15. Damn, that's actually cheap. And that's on the fantasy. Is that on the Fantasy Flight? It won't let me. It won't let me click it. It won't. That is so weird. You can put in a. Well, wow. Not that. By the way, Deadman has a wow. My brain is not going. Deadman has the ability to put in web links, but now I can't even click the web link. fantasyflightgames.com accessories 15. Yeah, so that's actually not that bad. Yeah, Drew says exactly, it is too many dice, and the positive and negative results are allocated on different dice makes them bad. They got that better in the L5R version. Okay. I love Legend of Five Rings. Drew said, Death says, I really do like the different dice used in many systems. It sets aside many TTRPGs from your typical board game that uses D6. You'll notice that there are a lot of game designers that will default to D6s because what's it called? The bounded accuracy of using D6s is small enough that you can get you get a wide enough range of choices with a with dice that are super popular and everyone knows what they are, and yet you can get a bountiful range of parabolas and sine waves when using two, three, four d6s, and then you can eliminate the addition subtraction. So you don't have to roll 4d6 and add them all together. You can just say, look for all the sixes, or look for all the ones, or look for everything that's four and above. And so, and then of course that also can affect the probabilities as well. And so that's why you see a lot of indie games use d6s, because everybody knows what they are. Now a person that's never played a game before may not call it a d6, but they could quickly learn the nomenclature, right? They can quickly learn, like, oh, you mean gambling dice? Yes, that's what we call a D6 because it has six sides. And you go, oh, all right, hey, show me what this game is, rather than trying to explain what the difference between a D20 and a D12 is, or the strange D10 that it has a special name to it because it doesn't have regular sides. Shadow says, I'm almost disappointed when I see a system that just uses D6s. Oh, okay. Yeah. D12s are going to keep people away. Yeah. That's funny. I want to say Cyberpunk uses D6s. Was sad when I learned that many decades ago. Was it? I think it's D10s and D6s, I think, is what Cyberpunk 2020 uses. And Cyberpunk Red, I think it's die 10s and die 6s only. There are some games that are like D20s and D12s only, something like that. Like it uses two types of dice. I don't mind the D6 games because I understand where they're coming from. Yeah, maybe D10s. Yeah. Yep. And then of course there's the dice pool games. Dice pool go bucket sized. All the White Wolf games and their derivations thereof, like all the Exalted games and the ones that came from that, is bucket of dice. You have the link I shared in the search you have there, the one with the Star Wars logo in the package. Oh, you found it. Oh, okay. Phoenix Flight Games. There it is. I guess if I visit the page, let's share this tab instead. Go to the page. And we are on Fantasy Flight Games page. And these are the dice. $14.95. Okay. All right. Kind of cool. I think I just let's do this instead. Oops. I stopped sharing. Sorry. All right, there we go. Let's get back in it. There it is. Sorry about that. Because I'm looking at a thing. You guys can't see it, mind you. Mind you, that bastardized Shadowrun was circa 1991. I still have my old... I don't have the original rules, but I do have a lot of my original Shadowrun stuff. So you be nice. We kind of mix Cyberpunk and Shadowrun together. Okay, I don't mind that. I was just listening to a podcast about Cyberpunk wise. This William Gibson and going over the 1980s high of Cyberpunk and the progenitor of the Cyberpunk Cyberpunk aesthetic, I guess, would be the individual that came up with a lot of the words and phrases we use till this day to describe Cyberpunk. And William Gibson was a writer that in a weird way by accident created Cyberpunk because he knew that his manuscript would take years to write, and so volunteered to be part of a writers conclave for a publisher. So a publisher back in the 80s was looking for a number of sci-fi writers to back-to-back write a bunch of novels, and the publisher would put these novels out back to back to back under their logo, under their umbrella, to show like a number of science fiction stories that they had. And I get it. I see what the publisher was trying to do. It's like a speculative housing, right? A a I know I'm diverging of here, but a home builder buys a plot of land, builds homes on it, hoping to sell them, rather than you going out to buy a plot of land and you building your own single home. That's what a speculative builder will do. Hey, everyone needs homes to live in this location. How about we? Let me close this down. Um, how about we stop sharing? Yes, that's how we're going to do it. Hey, Anon, you're fine. So I can see a book publisher going to a bunch of sci-fi writers and going, listen, I want a collection of sci-fi writers, but you need to be able to write the book in 1 year, because at the end of that year, we're going to have the money, time, and energy to put out these books, market them under our umbrella, and tell everybody, hey, we are the place to come when you want to find your favorite sci-fi book. Now, mind you, this is back in the 80s. So there wasn't like an internet to search for all these things. You'd have to go to the bookstore and you would see the bookshelves filled with these books. And William Gibson signed up for that and then put his own manuscript aside, decided to write it, kind of regretted it because he said it was rough to try to write a full book in a year, and came out with Neuromancer as his first book, and and he took off ever since then. But my point about side note, we're circling back to art and science and D12s and making one roll, is that sometimes we stumble into a thing for good or bad, and we can stick with that thing. And I think this might be a good idea. So in Fantasy D20, we roll a D20 with modifiers to find out when we go for initiative. Then we use a D20 to find out our skills and or combat, and we roll a D20 for some modifiers, which is not connected to our initiative. And then after we find out the success and failure, we either find out whether we succeeded or failed in a skill attempt, or we use magic or combat. And then after we use that D20 for modifier, then we pick up other dice to show the damage output, basically how progressive or how much success did we get on our attack. And then we roll separate dice. And those three different common separations we could actually do with one die roll. And I'd like to see, my mind tells me that although this seems bizarre, I think it not only will be faster, but also allow the player to choose the very nature of their success and failure by having the outcome of their when they go, when they go, do they succeed, and then the effect of it on the back end. Oh, my nick's taken from Death's Angel Shadow, which was a good AI in the Neuromancer video game based upon the book by Gibson. My high school buddy's nick was Count Zero. Yeah, Count Zero. Yeah, which sounds a little bit like Count Zero isn't what you think it is. It's not like Count Dracula. It's not. That's not what it means. It means counting down to zero. And yeah, because it was Neuromancer, and also the funny thing is the three books, Neuromancer, Count Zero, and Mona Lisa Overdrive, were William Gibson's trilogy of sorts, known as the Sprawl series, because each of the books took place in the same world. Molly Millions, Debbie Diamonds, whatever her name was. She had the implanted mirror shades, and the not monofilament, but they were like diamond carbide fingernails that she could extract from her fingers and cut people's throats and stuff like that. She was a mercenary that took place in all the stories, and that character existed in the Sprawl series. Yeah, Burning Chrome. Burning Chrome was the anthology series. All that took place. Yeah, the best pirate count is still the count. A 1, a 2. Anyway, so someone takes their D12 dice, their 2D12 dice, this is art and science, and they roll them. And when they roll, Now they get to know when they get to act, and if they roll low, they know that they're going to act probably later. They know how effective they are, so they can decide for themselves. Ooh, I rolled a 4 and a 6. That I don't think that's good. Damn it. Do I want to take an attack action knowing I'm going to fail? Probably not, right? And then they can find out the results of it. How much damage do I do? So all of that could be accomplished in one die roll. Now, of course, yeah, and Anon says core principle I've settled on one stake per roll, and the stakes are established before rolling. Um, Anonymous mentions, or Anon, I'm going to say, mentions like know the stakes before you roll, and I know this sounds kind of funny for people who aren't in the game design, but Cipher System does this, whereas sometimes we don't do this in Fantasy D20, and maybe we should. So there's a difference between adding and subtracting all the modifiers first, so we know what the stakes are before we roll the dice, versus rolling the dice and then adding or subtracting modifiers after we roll the dice. And Cipher System does the mods first, die roll second, so that you I don't want to, this sounds terrible to say it like this, but the bargaining for modifiers happens so that everyone is on the same page, and then much like a Las Vegas style thing, then you get to roll the dice, and then when you see the die, the number that comes up on the die is the actual effect. Now, Dungeons and Dragons could actually work exactly the same way. We just don't do it that way, and I don't know why. I don't know why we roll a d12, roll a d20. You roll a 12 on the die, and then we're like, okay, I add a +4 plus this, because sometimes that can like circumvent what you really want to see happen. Yeah, Anon says both Genesis and 7th Sea both trip over doing too much as once. Not familiar with 7th Sea, but I do understand the Genesis system. And yeah, sometimes it's like a little bit, we want to hurry up and get to the outcome, and every game design has their own method of doing it. Some people feel like the game system may do it too fast, and you're constantly backtracking. I rolled an 18. Great, I succeeded. Well, hold on. And then someone may interrupt that action or do a thing, and you're like, okay, now we got to take it back. Others embrace that jockeying, that horse racing, where you're like, you're not sure who's ahead or whatnot. But in game design, sometimes we have to consider that. Like, are we doing too much, or are we not enough? You guys are silly. Shadowrun. Deadman says, I know a guy who made a samurai who had a move by wire initiative booster that in the culmination of a session gave him like 15 actions in one turn. Damn. Yeah, Deadman says, yeah, Shadowrun first edition, second edition was a D6 bucket of dice game. Yeah. I like dice pool games, but sometimes it can get a little bit too much, especially when there's no bounded, not bounded accuracy, bounded modification. You're just adding like, oh, I get 2 dice for this, I get 3 more dice from that, because I spend this thing, I get to double my dice. Now I've got 12 dice, and then I take that kind of stacking and stacking. Dude, yeah, sorry about my ADD movement. You're fine. That was my jam back in the 80s and 90s. Me too. Drew says I used the complete opposite, but I went completely with a roll and move system. Yeah, and I'm not here to say one thing is better than another. I'm here to say that sometimes we need to recognize, like, when a randomizer is used, if you even have a randomizer, how is that randomizer, when does it happen, how fast do we get to the uh, how fast do we find out what the difficulty is, and then when we use the randomizer, how fast do we get to the outcome? And some games try to simplify this, and it can be the simplification of the thing drives people away because they want more detail about it, right? And others are like, no, 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 no. We should take, like, for example, I think is there's a game I've never played it, Aces and Eights RP. I believe it's Aces and Eights RPG, a Western, a hard, um, yeah, yeah, Aces and Eights. Let's see if we find it. They have it on Amazon. Shattered Frontier RPG. And if I'm not mistaken, the gun action with the six shooters is done as tenths of a second, and it breaks it down to tenths of a second in terms of how fast a person can move when pulling a weapon to try to shoot someone. And it uses a not a, I don't want to say complicated, but it uses a detailed targeting system, spiral like targeting system. See if I can, and it's pretty interesting. And I think this is a good example of using a mechanism that takes a while to discover success and failure on purpose, almost like someone is shooting in slow motion. I go for my gun. Okay, a tenth of a second, you reach for the gun. Then for my next tenth of a second, or the second tenth of a second, I grab the handle of the gun. All right. The other person's like, well, he's going to be a little faster than you. He's going to shoot from the hip. I was like, oh shoot. Okay. My third action, instead of drawing my gun out or shooting from the hip simultaneously, I'm going to move to the left or whatever. It yeah, it takes a fast system and slows it down, and really embraces that slowness. So there's a reason for having slow systems, if we understand what we're doing. Yeah, and Anonymous says Cipher system establishes the probability of success, but not the stakes. Yeah, and it can be difficult. Some people don't like Blades in the Dark because it has a variable probability and stakes system, and the original rules for the White Wolf game systems, vampire, werewolf, mage, etc., mummy, changeling, etc. It used to use a variable probability and stakes. So not only probability, meaning like you used dice pool d10s, and you had a difficulty number, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you rolled your d10s and you only counted those that were 6 and above, 7 and above, 8 and above. And not only that, but it also complicated it because then you were like, okay, well, how many successes? Now, it did have a 1 through 5 success system. So one success, you barely made it. 5 successes was complete. And depending on your action, sometimes you needed to get more successes to do a thing, or more successes than your opponent. But it was too complicated because it was like, okay, well, how do you modify what's going on? Like, is my probability low, but I need more successes, or you just need one success, but I rank my probabilities up high? And so they eventually smooth that out in the like further generations of it. Like I didn't get into second edition Vampire, but I did get into the V20s, the version 20 years later, stuff like that. Deadman says, then there's Exalted. I can make a starting character that can make an attack that deals over 120 dice damage. There's no reason for that is what we call exploits there, D. Yeah. 120 dice of damage averages out to 60th health levels of damage in a system where characters have 8 health levels. Yes, and for those, it's also a game where health level isn't survivability isn't based on a longer range of health levels. It's actually stacked defenses so that tougher characters don't get more health. They just have a harder ability to reduce their health, which is another weird. I mean, not weird, but is a different system of health than getting more hit points or something. 7th Sea Second Edition, on the other hand, presents the stakes up front in the form of consequences and opportunities. But because of the nature of the mechanics, the GM has to come up with multiple ones every roll. And this is why some people don't like the, I'm going to say powered by the apocalypse, but they're not the only systems that use this, where you have a failing forward, partial success, success with complication, where even now, during the open play testing of Daggerheart, there are a number of people who have made complaints about, like, okay, so you're rolling 2d12, one die is a hope die, the other one's a fear die. Does that mean we have to constantly be coming up with new narratives every time we roll the dice? And it can be a creative sink. Now, my personal opinion is that we're not taking into account the hive mind. So it's not the GM always coming up with something interesting happening on every die roll. What you do is you offload all that bullshit onto everybody else that's playing. So the ratio of creativity versus outcome is proportionally reduced by the number of people in the game. Damn, I actually said that in, wow. It came anyway. So my point being is, like, yeah, if I had to come up with a unique outcome for every single die roll, every time the players rolled the dice, including myself, yeah, is that a huge narrative load? Hell yeah. But I'm lazy. Like, I'm not only am I not late, not only am I lazy, but I also know that creatively there's a better way of doing things. And I know some people are better at it than I am, and usually the people that I'm interacting with are better. Oh, thank you, Irna. Yeah, it's like, no, I'm gonna offload all that bullshit on other people. So I'm like, you guys have only so many characters to use. I try to take what you're saying and expand on that idea, and so I do understand for people who have only ever played fantasy D20 systems, and they go to Daggerheart because they're fans of Critical Role, and they're just like, what hope and fear dice? What? How am I supposed to describe all that stuff? Yeah. Yeah, he's not lazy, just creative. Listen, being a great leader is not about knowing how to do things. It's about putting people in the proper location for them to excel in what they do. So leaders, if I'm a GM and I think I'm a leader, I'm going to recruit all my players and use their creativity to come up with fun, interesting things to use. And listen, we're gonna borrow and steal from, like, all the media that we've ever seen or interacted with. Every graphic novel, every comic book, every television show, every movie that we've ever seen, every video game, you just borrow and go, oh, maybe I dropped the thing, or twist and fall, or a bird falls out the sky. I don't know. You just come up with a number of things. And it doesn't even need to be that interesting. It just needs to incorporate the failing forward or success with failure or complication of a thing, right? So it doesn't need to be first thing written, brilliance, Oscar winning movie writing. Like, this is writer's room stuff. This is like, well, why don't we have, I don't know. Hey, you remember in that movie where the lady came around the corner with the baby carriage, and the truck hit the baby carriage, and everyone was like, oh my God, it was a baby. And then when the baby carriage hit the ground, it was just a bunch of, like, aluminum cans. And we realized the lady was like a homeless lady picking up aluminum cans. You remember that? And everyone's like, yeah. Well, how about we have that happen? That's what you do, right? Which that scene did happen in the movie, and I cannot remember the movie that it happened in. You guys tell me. But my point is that I understand the narrative load, but you offload all that bullshit onto everybody else because there's going to be multiple people in your gaming group that are like that will tend to fall more towards the creative side. Yeah, so instead of those stakes emerging organically from the ongoing narrative, the GM has to pause and come up with a handful of possibilities. Yep, 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 yep. And that in and of itself I can see as a barrier to many of the powered by the apocalypse games. Now, many of those games aren't powered by the apocalypse. I just mentioned one, Daggerheart. Uh, but I get it. I do get it. So and it says mechanics first narrative systems like Genesis and Daggerheart are creatively exhausting because they give you so little to work with. They don't help you be creative. They require it. I think it would behoove them to have like bullet points or a list of things that could happen. Like, hey, in combat, and then you have a like a random. I love random lists, but you have a random list, and let's be honest, most of us don't even bother rolling on the random list. It's a quick what could happen. Oh, here's an interesting thing that could happen. Pick one and then just do it that way. Also, I think it behooves systems like that to have a point at which it's not always required to have something interesting happen. Sometimes you either just do it or don't. And so I'm in the same position as well. So for my how I'm dealing with it is I'm cutting it in half. So players want to roll the light die higher than the dark die. And the light die, there are no complications, but the dark die is. So only half the time, or actually less than half the time, is their life complicated. So the player, if they succeed, they don't have to keep coming up with new complications. They roll the dice, the light die is high. You did the thing you wanted to do gets done. But if the dark die is high, they have a choice. They either just fail the thing, so it just makes it pass fail, or they can use the dark die as the success, but because they're using the dark die, it comes with a complication. So how I'm doing it is I'm including complications, which narratively, like you said, Anon, like it can be exhausting because it's like constantly and requires it. So what I'm attempting to do, and I don't know how successful it'll be, I'm cutting that mental workload in half. So players who constantly have their mods keep going to the light die and keep succeeding, you're not going to get it's not going to be that complicated. But if they keep rolling terribly and the dark die keeps coming up high, that's when, yeah. Anon says add bullet points and you get powered by the apocalypse moves. Exactly, and powered by the apocalypse moves try to, what's a good term? Funnel. They tried to funnel. The design mechanism is to funnel the creative load into a narrow focus, so you're not constantly reaching and picking for. You're not looking at a blank canvas. You guys know the idea that if an artist is given a blank canvas and all the paints they've ever wanted, most artists, painters, going with painters here, have a difficult time coming up with a painting display. But if you tell a painter, I'm only giving you 3 colors and I want you to make a cityscape, and the cityscape must be upside down when you're done, then the artist can go, oh, and becomes more creative by the construct, I mean the constriction of elements. And powered by the apocalypse uses moves as a way to constrict the creativity to squeeze out the outcome of the complication. So the moves kind of tell you what the outcome would be, if that makes sense. Death Angel Shadow says some could argue that it's not too different from having puzzles the players have to solve. The PCs may or may not be able to. Sometimes, yeah. Like, okay, so Shadow brings up the idea of see, do I have one nearby? I usually have bullshit hanging around. Nope. Nope. Okay, so um, the OSR falls into this category more often than a little bit, and it sometimes drives new players batty. So the idea of player knowledge and skill over character knowledge and skill often happens in the OSR, where the it doesn't matter how intelligent your character is, your wizard having a 17 intelligence versus what they didn't have barbarian. Fighter having an 8 intelligence to figure out the puzzle. What would happen is in many of these OSR modules, at least in the olden days, they would have like a 3-card Monty or 5 levers or a chessboard, or you guys have seen those wooden carved. I do have some in my back room, the man cave, but those wooden, or usually they're made of wood or they're made of metal, and they are interlocked pieces, and you have to figure out how to unlock them and put them back together. They have like the chains and the links together, and with the needle through it, and you had to figure out how to unthread the needle with the thing. And all of that was player capability over character capability. And even that can be a bit harsh. I remember Stearns was the place to go when I was young. Back in my day, we used to go to malls. These were like indoor places with a bunch of stores. Not like you young folk. Anyway, but you get the point, right? You'd go into these places and they had the puzzles, and it's like, well, wait a minute. You're playing a Fightor with an 8 intelligence, and I'm playing Wizard with an 18 intelligence. Shouldn't I be able to figure this out faster? Now, listen, we in my gaming group, we narratively explained it that it's not the dumb character being smarter than the intelligent character. What's happening is the narrative load of the other players is the intelligence of the smart character. That, I know that sounds strange. So the players are smart, but that the other players being smart is the intelligence of the one character who is smart. Who, now sometimes we would joke and say, well, maybe the dumb character accidentally finds out the answer by like coming about it by accident or something. But yeah. Comp native. I hope I'm pronouncing your. Well, anyway, native says, do you like systems like Mythic where you reference a threads list for random and interpreted scene ideas? I'm not familiar with Mythic, but I like prompts. I mean, I'm not that smart, right? Like sometimes we have to know ourselves, okay? And I like systems with complications. Personally, I like I've always played Dungeons and Dragons with complications. That if a player rolls a high enough roll, or they do enough damage, that if they fight the winged wyvern, do they cut off the poison tail, or put a spear through one of the wings, or knock the teeth out of the monster, or sunder the shield, even though there's no system in it. I always did that, and my players loved it. And we would, coming from an OSR world, we always used a D6 system when it came to like side rules. So we would always use it like, we would always discuss openly, okay, on the chance on a 1 through 6, what are the chances of doing X? And then we would go, well, I don't know, like a 50-50. And then we would roll the dice and go, okay, well, 50-50, you fall to the left or right of the cave-in, and you're either trapped or you're not. Like, we would do things like that. So, and I came from that school. Now, mind you, we do have games that, you know, if you add complication systems in it, you'll kind of break it. But prompts, I love a prompt. Right. Let me pull down my let's see if we can pull this here without dumping shit all over the place. Here we go. This is from the Oracle character generation system, where there's a bunch of cards, and I'm going to flip over the open box because I can't get the top off the thing. But anyway, these are a bunch of prompt cards that give you prompts for NPCs. And just as an example, I know it's going to be very difficult to see these. The prompt cards are decks of cards, and this is just a small example, are decks of cards that are color coded. Sorry about the lighting, because to get proper lighting on my face, I need a bunch of other lights. I got to actually probably turn some of these off. But each card, so like you start out with a like a reddish card, and let me pull one of these randomly out here. And this one says Warlock. So we have it. Man, you can't even. Let me turn it down. So right here we have Warlock, and then it gives you some prompts. Come on, it wants to focus on my face. Doesn't matter. Anyway, and then it gives you prompts below that. So like it might be an Eldritch, Demon, Devil, or Fae. You might have an Assassin who's in a Poisoner, Sniper, Cloak and Dagger, or Arcane. It gives you some prompts for that. And then the next prompt is like, what's their personality, like aggressive, calculating, disapproving. And then you get another cards like, what are they after? Revenge, power, fear, mayhem, immortality. And then there's another set of cards with a different color code. You know, here's another personality thing. Are they stubborn, jealous, abusive, arrogant? And lastly, what do they want? Like, or how do you describe them? Do they have a physical ability? Do they have a mental ability, vocal quirk, hidden bond, body modifications? Now, mind you, could I come up with an NPC on the fly? Sure, they're combinative, but I'm not that smart. so having anything like you're talking about Mythic to have like a prompt, I would love to have it. And maybe like Daggerheart, Powered by the Apocalypse games, things of that nature. Maybe having like, okay, in combat, here's like a D12 list of pretty random things that could happen in combat, and what kind of complications they are. Now, as a person that loves complications, I think sometimes we can get a little bit we can both get distracted by trying to think too creatively and come up with gonzo things that don't fit into the narrative of what we're playing. Which reminds me, back in the day when I started this channel, I don't know, like 9 years ago or something, 8-9 years ago, there was a series of videos where I was being very sarcastic, talking about like the worst players and the worst game masters. And and one of those worst ones was like the drama, like the drama student, where they're constantly going off on these tangents about being too, you know, trying to be too focus the spotlight on them and being too dramatic, when sometimes all we just need you to do is just give one or two lines and just move the on, right? And in games that have fail forward, succeed with consequence ideas, sometimes we are not playing the game that's in front of us, or we aren't immersed in the setting that is in front of us. A complication on a die roll in Call of Cthulhu in 1920s mid-America, searching for demons out in the empty, I don't know, farm town communities on the open plains of the United States, is a lot different than a modern hard science fiction setting, or a comedic anthropomorphized, I don't know, mice surviving in a world that's in a in your local park, and they're dodging people on roller skates and bicycles and beehives and things like that, right? So I think sometimes the complications should fit the tone. Are we having fun and being comedic, tongue in cheek, or are we being serious? And also the setting. Like, is this science fiction? Is it modern? Is it fantasy? And which types are those? Is this sword and sorcery Bronze Age, or are we talking um, are we talking gunpowder and things like that? Yeah, context is king. Yeah, 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 stochastic. Yeah, I mean, and this goes back to the. Do you guys remember old like crit hit and fumble tables? That used to be a big thing in older like 80s, early 90s, mid 90s games. Some people hated those tables because you'd have results on tables that were just like you stab yourself in the back, and it's like, come on, really? I've got a 10-foot spear or pike. Am I really going to stab myself in the back? That makes zero sense for the situation, and a little bit comes across as a little bit too comedic for what it represents. So I get why some people are like, I hate those systems. And sometimes it's the people you play with. Is maybe it's not the system, sometimes it's us. So if you have a player who's constantly like chomping at the bit to make the next joke and making characters suffer from player table jokes, the I know you guys have seen this before. The I sneak up behind the goblin. I'm going to make a stealth roll, sneak up behind a goblin. Oops, I rolled a nat one. Well, instead of stabbing the goblin in the back, you stroke his back gently. You know what I mean? And it's really, like, really, that's not. Now, if you stepped on a twig and you alerted, or you went to sneak up behind the goblin turns towards you and goes, I knew you were there all along, maybe that works better. But the comedic, my player character fails miserably and jokingly, I think is about context, not necessarily about a problem with the system. But like you guys are mentioning, it could be that there's no reference. It's like, great, okay, so you told me I'm failing forward. What the hell does that mean when I'm trying to swim across a lake or pick a lock or sneak up on that goblin or convince the king to give us more money or um, navigate through a star field? Like, what does that really mean? And we can all come up with creative ideas, but some work better than others. So if we had some examples, I think it would work. Anon says, I'd argue the blank canvas problem is the biggest one in RPG design, and mechanics should help support the creative load. There is a fruitful void is a thing, and games can be designed around a fruitful void. And we've talked about this most recently on this channel. It's difficult as a designer to to place that fruitful void. So fruitful voiding, I don't that's not a verb, but fruitful voids are places in your game that specifically don't have rules for the outcome that you're looking for. So sometimes that fruitful void is simply because there are so many outcomes it would be difficult to funnel them down. Other times, and I've heard this before, sometimes the fruitful void is there on purpose for us to have the conversation that we're having right now. Not this specific conversation, but you get what I'm saying. So a an example in the OSR would be not having perception check rules, right? So some people in the OSR don't want to have perception as a skill because they want it to have a fruitful void. So there are no die rolls, and I'm being very um, generalized here. Depending on what version of D20 classic fantasy you play, there are no perception rules. But the fruitful void is, what does your character do? Tell me what you're doing. Oh, one character takes a 10-foot pole, and I'm giving you real examples here. Someone takes a 10-foot pole. I'm going to take marbles and roll them across the floor. I'm going to take one of the 3 chickens that I have in my cage and let it run down the hallway. Oh, I'm going to take out powder in one of my sacks and take a small powder and put it around the cracks of the room or under the door. oh, you know what I'm going to do? We're going to work together, move the bed or move the tapestry aside, and see if there's a thing under. It's um, it is the literal example of you only succeed if you tell me what you're doing, and the dungeon master, because this is fantasy OSR, responds to its discussion and feedback response, back and forth, back and forth. Do the players find the secret, the not secret, the hidden trap door under the bed? Only if they move the bed and move the carpet, right? Do they find the secret door behind the throne? Well, if they do something, the powder around the corners of the room, maybe the game master goes, well, shit. They didn't move the throne. There is a secret door behind it, but they are actively participating in exploration. You know what? Air is blowing the powder. So you say, well, you put the powder around the edges of the room, and that powder is slowly blowing away from the corners on either side of the throne. Oh, maybe there's something under the throne. I'm going to move the throne and look under it. Well, you move the throne, there's nothing under it, but you see there is a secret door, hidden door behind the throne, right? It's that kind of thing. Stochastic says, without examples of outcomes, it's often difficult to support creativity. Exactly. Exactly. And you know what? A lot of that stuff could be really simply fixed in game design by just making like lists. Like, here's some combat examples, here's some exploration examples, here's some social examples of complications. And sometimes those complications could be character generated. Sometimes the complications have nothing to do with the player character's action. So an example would be a player character goes to sneak up on an unsuspecting, easy to strike enemy, and a third party intercedes to distract or interpose themselves. That is not a failure of the character's capability. It was a complication of the world being alive. And sometimes I think, you know, when we're young and dumb, we do that. I'm going too long. You guys, the Stochastic says you've got to do the thing to do the thing is a good underlying principle. Yeah, I still play by that. I don't let people walk into rooms and make perception checks. I'm like, no, you're going to tell me what you're going to do, and it can be generalized, right? You know what? I'm going to be very careful. I'm going to walk around the room poking and prodding things, and then I might say, okay, well, you notice that the one of the tapestries doesn't seem as old, you know, like it's that kind of thing, or oh, you are actively doing a thing. Instead of your perception, you should be really using investigation as an example. Um, yeah, and it says, you enter the temple. What does the idol look like? How the fuck do I know? I need more to go. Yeah, that's where now some players hate that. I don't get in. I used to get into these deep conversations. I don't much anymore. But there's like think of a movie, and so there's like actor stance, director stance, producer stance, um, cameraman stance, I guess you could call that, in the sense of if I'm in actor stance, which means I'm playing my character and I'm living in the world. If I prefer to be an actor stance, when you ask me what does the idol look like, and my character is looking at it, I'm waiting for you to tell me what the idol looks like. If I decide what to look like, then I'm not the actor anymore. I'm the props manager, right? you know, this is dumb, but I remember a silly interview with Samuel L. Jackson, who talked about doing the movie Sphere. And in the movie Sphere, there is a CGI alien sphere, and it is like bronze colored with like ripples on it. And he said the entire movie, he didn't know what the sphere was going to look like. He said he always thought it was smooth and silver. Now, did that come across on the screen? Probably not. But he's the actor. He doesn't know what the CGI is going to look like. A lot of these actors don't know. They just know there's dots and a small GoPro in front of their face, and they're wearing one of these funny suits with the with it used to be the dots. Now it's the it's the gray and black, leotards and things, and they've got to pretend that they're wearing battle armor or a cloak or they're an alien or whatever. Yeah, like stochastic. Yep, yep. Too true. The content of conversation needs to present enough info to go on. Now, there are some players that are very like. Listen, if you play with world builders, you're not going to have this much of a problem. Like, because some people are just consummate world builders. They constantly want to add in details. They want to add in features. They're adding in background to characters that are basically simply introduced as back. I played with a person. Every time we met an NPC, the player would come up with backgrounds for the NPC that some of them were goofy, some of them were fun, and we at the table would just embrace it, right? And then he this was a guy who would just walk into small towns and go, "I'm going to look for my cousin." And we're just like, "Oh, I guess this person has a cousin here." And then they would say, "Well, I really don't have a good relationship with the cousin because I owe them money." And this would just be made up on the fly. And we'd go, "Okay, great." And he was really good at it. So sometimes maybe I agree that games designers should come up with like how do you, if you're going to introduce this complicated system, when I say complicated, the complication system, sorry, then if we have some base examples of the thing, um, man, I really wish, I know I went too long on this. I really wish I could show you what how variable a stacked random list can really work, but maybe we'll do that another time. We'll do that another time. So anyway, guys, thank you very much for spending your valuable time with me. Um, I appreciate you spending it here. I hope I can return to you a little bit of a coupon and some change back to you in your tabletop um, role playing games. Didn't talk too much about science fiction, but I am interested in using my system that I'm calling Art and Science to have a not single die roll, using the 2d12 system to show when you go, how effective you are, and what the outcome of an action is by rolling all the dice. You roll the dice once and use that as your feature. Meaning, like if you roll low dice, maybe you don't act first, which means you probably don't want to get into combat, which means your combat heavy character might be not so enthused to get into a gunfight if you rolled low. So now you choose other actions for your character that pulls you out of the gunfight because you already know the outcome of the die roll. If that makes sense. And then the narrative can be shaped around the die roll. You already know you rolled low. What choice do you make knowing that you're not going to be as effective as you thought you would? And so that's where I'm coming from. And I wonder if it's giving away too much upfront, or is it giving away just enough that people would embrace it, considering the air quote standard roll a die to find out when you go for initiative, roll a die to see when you attack or if you succeed or fail, and then roll another die for damage or outcome. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for being part of the show. I hope the music wasn't too intrusive as well. And I've taken yeah, how Sarcastic says, "How is the system coming along?" It's listen, it's coming along pretty good, but sometimes you have to kill your darling. Sometimes you have to you. Sometimes the best measuring tool is a set of scissors. Sarcastic says, "Would love to have a chat." Yeah, would love to have a chat about it. Yeah, exactly. Kylie says it sounds neat. Yes, I, you'll see in my thumbnails there are 2d12s down in the corner, although this thumbnail I made them bigger, but it doesn't matter. Um, it is a 2d12 system, light die and dark die, and I like complications, so the dark die is the complication die, but I also wanted to reduce the amount of complications, so the light die is always in favor of the player characters. So all the modifications happen on the light die. And excuse me, and there's not going to be a laundry list of mods. It's basically, if you have a thing, the thing becomes easy. If you don't have the thing, it's a wash. It's 50-50. And if you really are, if it's working against you, it becomes a hard thing to do. So it's going to be easy, medium, hard, or easy, standard, hard. So just be very simple, because I want to release it into your guys' hands. Um, so players, what you're looking for is rolling 2d12. You want your light die to be above your dark die. If the dark die is higher, you fail. If the light die is higher, you succeed. The option is you can choose to succeed if you use the higher die, which is the dark die. That's the one that comes with complications. So every die roll isn't complicated. It's only when the players choose to use the dark die do we have a complication. So I'm cutting the complications down, but I still want to incorporate them. This is my producer, um, this is Sophie, my producer, and she's telling me that I've gone on a little too far. I know it's difficult for you to see her, um, but oops. Let's see if you can. There she is. Oh, so now you're going to be camera shy? You jumped up here to literally nose the camera, and then you're deciding not to get into the camera? Yeah, yeah, I can make an ASMR of you because you're purring so heavy. So anyway, guys, I told you this is in a hutch. But anyway, guys, thank you very much for being part of the show. I really appreciate it. Maybe that's a little bit too far behind the scenes or whatever. Yes, scale and difficulty are another bugbear worthy of a stream. Okay, you got it. We'll do that. Yeah, one of my favorite pr- content creators is Red Dice Diaries, and he's always talked about like bugbears, and he's pretty fun with that. So, guys, have a great one. Thank you very much for being part of the show. I really appreciate it. We're going to count down as we leave out of here. Guys, have a great one. Thank you very much for being part of the show. Have a great weekend, everyone. I will see you bright and early Monday morning. Peace and tranquility. Bye.